It began not with conquest, but with curiosity, a hunger disguised as exploration, a journey masked as discovery that would drain a continent of its soul. Africa, vast, ancient and abundant, its soil, its rivers, its mountains, all held treasures that the world coveted. Gold, ivory, diamonds, copper, oil, the veins of a land that pulsed with life and potential. But from across the sea came ships, flags, and men who saw not a home, but a prize. Before European colonization, Africa thrived on its own terms. Trade routes spanned deserts and forests. Empires rose on the wealth of gold, salt, and intellect. The Ashanti Kingdom, Dahomey, the Sokoto Caliphate, each had systems of governance, commerce, and diplomacy. Yet in European eyes, Africa was terra nullius, a land belonging to no one, a continent waiting to be claimed. And in 1884, the claim began. Europe gathered, not in Africa, but in Berlin. Not a single African leader was invited. At that table, nations carved up an entire continent like a feast. Britain took the lion's share, France followed close. Belgium seized the Congo, Germany, Italy, Portugal, and Spain claimed their pieces. It was called the Scramble for Africa. But it was not a scramble for land, it was a scramble for wealth. What followed was extraction, brutal, relentless, and systematic. Under King Leopold II, the Congo became a private empire. Rubber fed the Industrial Revolution, and Africa paid in blood. Villages were burned, families mutilated. Millions died under quotas enforced with whips and bullets. The wealth of the Congo built palaces in Brussels, while its people were chained to trees, punished for the greed of a king. The world called it civilization, but to those who lived it, it was terror. In South Africa, British magnates like Cecil Rhodes saw not people, but profit. Diamonds from Kimberley, gold from the Witwatersrand, mined by black laborers under impossible conditions. Men were confined in compounds, paid in tokens, and watched by armed guards. Entire communities were uprooted, their lands seized for mining companies. The wealth extracted from those mines financed the British Empire and laid the foundations for apartheid's economic hierarchy, a system where black labor fueled white wealth. Across West Africa, European powers restructured economies to serve their needs. Cash crops replaced food crops. Railways connected mines to ports, not villages to markets. In Ghana, cocoa became gold for Britain. In Nigeria, palm oil greased the engines of European industry. But for Africans, there was no profit, only taxation, coercion, and control. Colonial economies were designed for export, to feed Europe's factories, not Africa's people. The wealth left, the poverty stayed. In Kenya and Tanganyika, fertile lands were seized for European settlers. Africans were taxed to force them into wage labor. Coffee and tea, grown for export, became symbols of exploitation. Resistance was met with violence. Entire villages were burned during uprisings like the Mau Mau Revolt. The land belonged to Africa, but the ownership belonged to Europe. Colonial infrastructure was built not for development, but for extraction. Tracks led from mines to harbors, not from town to town. Every rail laid, every port constructed served one purpose: to move Africa's wealth outward. Europe's industrial revolution thrived on African resources. African gold-backed European currencies. African cotton-clothed European cities. African oil-fueled European wars. Yet, as Europe modernized, Africa was left behind, locked in economies that could not sustain themselves without foreign control. Millions died under forced labor systems. Countless others were displaced from ancestral lands. Communities fractured, languages suppressed, traditions erased. Education favored obedience over intellect. Governance replaced kings with colonial administrators. The map of Africa was redrawn, not to unite but to divide. Tribal boundaries were ignored. Artificial borders created tensions that linger to this day. The mid-20th century brought independence, but freedom came with a cost. Colonial powers left behind economies dependent on exports, governments shaped by European interests, and debts that kept nations bound to their former masters. Foreign corporations continued to control Africa's mines, oil fields, and plantations. The exploitation never ended. It simply changed form. Today, Africa remains rich in resources, yet poor in returns. Oil in Nigeria, gold in Ghana, cobalt in Congo, still extracted for foreign profit, still leaves local communities impoverished. Colonialism no longer needs soldiers, it now wears suits. Loans, trade deals, and multinational contracts replace the whip and chain. But the purpose remains the same: to control, to extract, to profit. Europe once drained Africa through slavery and conquest. Now it does so through debt and diplomacy. The scars of colonial exploitation are written in inequality. Nations rich in resources struggle with poverty. Borders drawn by foreign hands breed conflict, and the wealth of Africa continues to enrich others. But from those scars rise voices, a new generation demanding justice, reparations, and reform. They see through the lies of aid and development. They call for ownership, sustainability, and pride. Africa is no longer a victim in waiting. It is a force awakening. The continent's young minds are reclaiming their narratives, building industries that serve Africans first, rewriting history not in ink, but in innovation. Colonialism stole centuries, but it could not kill spirit. And though the shadows of exploitation linger, Africa's dawn is breaking once more. It began with the sea, and perhaps it will end with the tide turning.